Well, we will go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody to the third and final part of our Inclusion and Diversity Employer Panel Series. So on behalf of Career Development and Corporate Relations, the Engineering Academic Excellence Program, and 100 Women Strong, I am so excited to welcome you students to this afternoon's panel. My name is Marissa Miller, and I serve as one of the career counselors within the Career Development and Corporate Relations office, and I will be moderating this evening's panel. And so a couple housekeeping items before we get started, and I do apologize for the scratchy voice this evening, but for today's session, students, if you would like to submit questions throughout our panel this evening, I highly encourage you to do so. How we will do that, if you would like to go ahead and enter your questions into the chat box, and you can send those directly to me, and I will be more than happy to provide that for the panel. In addition, we are recording this afternoon's panel so that in case students are not able to attend live with us, they will be able to hear from our incredible panelists after today's session. And so without further ado, before we get into some of the introductions, just in terms of what to be expecting from today's panel. And so we will be touching on the topic of self-advocacy in the workplace and strategies in navigating sticky situations. And that can probably mean a lot of different things, but we are here tonight to help in encouraging you as students to find effective ways to articulate your needs and ask the questions that you have in the workplace. But when sticky situations arise, whether they may or may not feel like big issues to you, but if it's important to you to be able to process through, we want to help you provide strategy and navigate those situations. Also, for students tonight that have work experience already, we'd love to hear from you during this time of ways that you've experienced this and ways that we can help. And for students that are just embarking on your internship search or your full-time job search, we'll also talk a little bit more about how to strategize in that way as well. But more than anything, today, myself, along with the panelists, are here to be our authentic selves. And so we want to hear the same from our students. And we plan to be vulnerable and share our personal experiences, but more so really want to encourage each of you to share about your experience and to be able to answer questions as honestly as you're able to, and also to share some insight with not only your current roles, but also previous roles as well. So that is enough of me for a little bit, but I would like to hand it over and ask each of our panelists just to introduce themselves. And panelists, I'd love for you to also include maybe what you're most excited about in relation to this afternoon's panel. So Jaeger, I will hand it over to you.
Well, welcome everybody. My name is Jaeger Livingston. I've worked for ExxonMobil. I've been with the company for a little over 10 years now. I graduated from Auburn in 2010 in chemical engineering, and I've been primarily in the manufacturing side of ExxonMobil for the chemical company, as well as what we refer to as fuels and lubricants, which is essentially our refining company. So I like to think that I have had a lot of sticky situations in my career, just based on the day-to-day troubleshooting and choices and decision-making that we have in the manufacturing world. So hopefully I will be able to convey some of that well enough to help you all in the future. And I think that is what I look forward to the most anytime we get to interact with students again, is how do we get someone better prepared for their future, right? And one way I love to do that is to teach through my mistakes or things that I learned the hard way. So.
Excellent. I'm Paige Lowry. I work with Southwire. We are a wire and cable manufacturer. I've been with Southwire for about 2 years, actually 2 years last week. I got my 2 year anniversary cup this morning, so that was nice. But I've worked in talent acquisition and recruiting for almost 8 years. And before that, I worked in marketing. And then before that, worked in public relations. I graduated from Auburn in May of 2011, and I graduated with a degree in communication with a minor in history. Probably the thing that I'm most excited about is just getting a chance to hang out with students. In my job, my responsibility is recruiting from campuses. So spending a lot of time with students, and obviously because of COVID, I'm not able to go to the places that I normally would. So I'm really excited to see people and, chat with them a little bit. So yeah, that's probably the thing I'm most excited about.
I guess it's my turn. My name is Raeanne Meyer. I'm currently the acting director for the Science and Technology Office at NASA Marshall Space Flight Center. I've got over 30 years experience with NASA. That's hard for me to believe, but it's true. What our organization does is basically oversees all the science at the Marshall Space Flight Center, anything from the operations of the Chandra X-ray observatory to we actually do satellite research, data for satellite research, and look at things like the amount of rainfall in third world countries so we can help farmers and things like that. Things that I truly have passion around. In addition, we do technology development, anything from nuclear thermal propulsion to the development and flight of extremely large solar sails for propellantless propulsion. And what I'm looking for today is I love to learn. I'm hoping to learn from our other panelists and from you. So I hope it's a very interactive session. Thank you.
And thank you all. We are excited again to have you. And so with that, we will start with some of the questions that we've prepared. But again, for those that have just joined, students, please feel free to chat me individually with any questions you would like for me to provide for our panelists today. So first question would be for our panelists, what is self-advocacy? And how do you advocate for yourself in professional and workplace environments?
Any preference? I guess
Yeah, I was gonna say, do we want to do the same?
Everybody's waiting on someone else to speak, just in case.
Yeah. Well, Jaeger, if you don't mind getting us started, and then we can hand it to Raeanne and then Paige.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will keep my answer short on this one. I think it's a very complicated topic, and it was one that I really struggled to answer myself when I saw the pre-questions. But to me, there's a balance in self-advocacy between over-advertising yourself or trying too hard to be seen, too hard to to be known by your superiors. And then there's another end of the spectrum where someone who's just doing their job day in and day out successfully, but maybe they don't advocate for their wins or they don't advocate for their strengths well enough to be seen. So I certainly don't have a firm answer of, oh, this is how many times you should go talk to your boss about how great the work is you're doing. But I know the answer is not 0, and I know the answer is not every 15 minutes. Right. And I think you have to play it by ear with each supervisor, manager, each connection that you work with, because all of them are probably going to have a different opinion too.
That's a good comment, Jaeger, and I probably do well to keep it short myself. But self-advocacy is something that I've worked very hard to develop over my career. And it's really all about being able to speak for yourself and influence others on your behalf, right? It's being able to speak up so that your needs, your wants, your desires are known. It's all about knowing yourself and what you want. It's also, and I'm going to agree with Jaeger, it's not always about I. It isn't. It's about being a good team member and being able to express what you contribute to a team. I'd highly recommend, as you start your career, you think about finding a mentor, someone that can help you navigate the environment and know when you're pushing too much and not enough. And I could go on, but I'm going to let Paige input as well.
Thank you, Raeanne. I think one of the things you said, kind of, it's not always about I. For me, that's one thing that I think is super important. You want to learn how you learn. And remember that not everybody learns the same way that you do. I would probably reckon a lot of the people on the call with more of an engineering thought process or background learn differently than I did with somebody that has more of a liberal arts background. So just thinking about sometimes how other people learn and how other people feel in situations is something to keep in mind. When you're advocating for yourself and you're saying, I can do this, or I am the person to do this, don't always discount that there may be somebody else that is also that person. And sometimes it can be a teamwork and team effort to get there. But I think Raeanne exactly hit the nail on the head. Find a mentor, work with someone that may be in kind of an opposite from you, somebody that has a different opportunity in the organization, somebody that looks differently from you, so that you have a kind of diverse opinion when you're, bouncing things off the wall. I think that's probably the best advice that I got early in my career, is to find someone that looks different and ask them to be your mentor.
Wonderful. Thank you guys so much. Something that's neat to already hear from each of you is the importance of communication, the ability to communicate, asking questions that you may not be aware of, or seeking out mentorship. And early on, frankly, is being able to, in part of an individual's development in the workplace, is knowing and understanding their strengths, but also how to approach situations differently, or what will be the best approach overall. So I thank you guys so much for thinking through that, or sharing that. So with that though, at times, being able to communicate and having critical conversations can be scary. It's at times unknown as to, you mentioned, Paige, working with people who are different from you, have different approaches, have different learning styles. So I'm curious to hear from each of you. And Raeanne, if you don't mind getting us started with the second question of how have you managed conflict in the workplace and navigated critical conversations that you may have had to have?
Okay, that's a good one. And I'm going to start by saying a lot of people don't like conflict, right? But at least in my profession, differences of opinion are critical. I mean, that's how you get things done. That's how you come up with great ideas. So we actually promote discussions around differences of opinion. When it gets sticky and it gets to disagreement or conflict, that's when it gets a little more difficult. Trying to keep emotion out of it, realizing that there are more than one right answer for almost everything. And how you balance that with, in my world, it's usually cost, schedule, mass, and other technical, and you have to make sure you're balancing that. But there's also issues around personalities and different desires and wants that are personal in nature. And we deal with that as well, because as most of you are probably passionate about your schoolwork, people are usually passionate around the work that they do and what they contribute. So I'm going to start with how we start and let other people chime in, but it's trying to come to an agreement on where you want to get, what's your end result, and coming to an agreement that you can work through it. Not just hitting the issue head to head that you're right and the other person's wrong. One of the most critical things you're going to learn in your career, it may not even be technical, but it's how to listen to somebody else and try to understand their point of view. And if you can do that, you're a long way to having that critical conversation. because you can't have it unless you understand the other person's perspective. So I hope that helps a little bit and gives Paige and Jaeger something to go off of.
Yeah, absolutely. I think back to kind of early in my recruiting career. I worked at a staffing agency, so we would find people to fill jobs at other companies. And I had a consultant who was working for me at a client site who unfortunately wasn't, I guess, wearing enough deodorant or wasn't showering enough. So it came down, hey, we need to have this conversation. And when it's somebody that is on a client site, the client doesn't have to have that conversation. I have to have that conversation. So when you talk about sticky, it's very sticky to have to call someone who you've built a relationship and a rapport with and say, hey, this is happening. So for me, it's really about kind of that empathetic feeling. How would I feel if somebody was to approach me with something like that? So that's really the way that I typically think through things is, you know, let's give a little grace here. There may be something going on. And I think in that instance, there was a lot of things going on at home that consultant couldn't control. So it wasn't necessarily, you know, I'm not invested in my healthcare or my hygiene. It was just I can't do this. So I think kind of having that empathetic approach of saying, how would I feel if somebody was to say this to me, and walking through conversations that way, that's for me seemed to be the best case scenario. And in that instance, you know, we had the conversation and, you know, he was very apologetic. He understood where we were coming from. He changed his hygiene habits, and we didn't have to worry about it again. But it definitely was not something that, you know, you wake up in the morning and expect to have that conversation by lunchtime. So that just pops into my head every time I have like a sticky, like, how would we handle that today? So yeah, I really think just, you know, giving yourself grace. If you do make a mistake, to say, all right, I'm going to fix it. But if you are going into a situation, just put yourself in somebody else's shoes, in that empathetic feeling, to say, how would I feel if somebody said that to me? And really, that's how I walk through most conversations.
I think that was excellent, Paige. And that example is awesome. We actually recently were having a conversation with my boss here, and she was sharing something she had learned from a book she was reading. And the example it gave for something similar was, if you see somebody walking down the hall with their fly unzipped, will you say something? Right. And it's such a simple example of intervening and having a conversation that's going to be a little awkward, especially if it's somebody of the opposite gender, right? But the reality is, how many of you would want someone to have that conversation, right?
Right.
And that to me was really the telltale when I was thinking about how I would answer this question, right? At the end of the day, if you ignore the problem, if you ignore the difficult conversation, it is going to get worse. Things will fester, and eventually something's going to boil over, and conversation is going to be had in a very, very unhealthy way, right? And that's when you let too much emotion get involved. So the only thing I really would add to what's already been said here, I really like the way Raeanne put it. It's okay to have a difference of opinions. There's very rare that there's one right answer to solve a problem. So everybody needs to understand that it is okay to have a difference of opinions, and it's okay to talk and listen to someone who has a different opinion than you, and to not agree at the end of that conversation, right? It's okay to go through a full conversation and still disagree with someone. It's when people stop talking and stop listening to one another that you end up being so one-sided or the other, right? That we're not getting any input from someone other than people who think just like us. That's an issue. So we actually have a training class at ExxonMobil that we provide. It's called conflict management, that I probably took it about 3 or 4 years into the company. And one of the things I learned from that was, you have to practice these conversations. As not fun as they are, you need to practice them. practicing them with people you know and trust is a whole lot easier than practicing them with someone that you work with and maybe barely have a relationship with. And so the way that training class was set up is you had maybe a 2 or 3 hour training class, and then at the end it was real life examples where you paired up with someone new every half hour, and you took turns with one person would take one side of a common argument, and the other person had to take the other side, regardless of what you believed. And you had to have a 30-minute conversation about it. And the topics we were given to choose from were really fun, like abortion or gun rights or religion or racism. And I will tell you, I have never had more awkward conversations in my life with people that were from all over ExxonMobil. I didn't know anyone else in that class with me of the 30 other participants. And I had to sit and have those conversations, and it definitely paid off, because as hard as it was, it made the more meaningful conversations that you have day in and day out a lot easier.
Well, that is incredible to think about a whole training course devised in that sense from your experience. But you hit the nail on the head, Jaeger, in relation to practicing conversations, and maybe not necessarily creating scenarios and hoping for sticky situations, but how we can intentionally just understand more about us as students and as professionals, our values, and how we want to communicate our needs, but also how do we ask for help? How do we ask questions to feel supported in that process? And a lot of that does come from experience and exposure to some of those critical conversations. But you mentioned fun topics, and then you started with very, very specific topic areas that can be very much opinionated for people. And so I think that that comes with not only a differing of opinions, a disagreement, but also that kind of leads me into a question, kind of skipping around here a little bit, is should topics come up in the workplace that maybe are not viewed by most as appropriate topic areas to discuss? Or when a situation arises where a coworker or a supervisor mentions something derogatory or mentions something inappropriate towards someone, how might a student prepare or practice a response, but also how to navigate that effectively, both as a professional, but also being their authentic selves and protecting themselves? That's a loaded question. So if anybody wants to start with a little bit of that, but that made me think about just how we can continue to challenge our students to be able to have these tough conversations, but equally have that balance of how to remain professional and appropriate in the workplace.
Yeah, so I think, oh, no, go ahead, Raeanne.
No, Paige, go, you go. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so I think, you know, from my perspective, if I take a situation where I hear something that may be like a little gossipy, or maybe something that I don't necessarily want to engage in, that's kind of the soft shutdown. It's the, okay, yeah, I'm gonna run, I got a meeting, I'm gonna disengage and remove myself from this situation. But then there are the situations where, you know, you're seeing something or something's happening and it's an immediate trigger for you. And I think that it's so important to know yourself, to know how that trigger is going to pull at you. In some instances, you can say no and no and walk away, and that's it. In some instances, you can say, I'm going to file my HR report. And then there are times where you can say, I have to protect myself and I have to remove myself from this situation. And you let your people, because, you know, everybody has their people at work, right? Like, you build those relationships, you will find people that you don't agree with, but people that are also your friends. And you have your people, and you can plug into that network and say that. But I don't think that anybody should be afraid to say no if there's a situation that is triggering for them. but I also think that there's an important part. People think, oh goodness, HR, like that's such a crazy thing. Who goes to be there as a balance. As a talent acquisition person, I sit in the HR group, and we support the humans that work with us. We have a responsibility as an employee to protect the organization with our humans. So if somebody is doing something or causing someone else to feel unsafe, to feel like their work environment isn't safe for them, that's not okay. So that has immediate implications, and whether that's a investigation or if that's a somebody being relieved of duty, those things can happen sometimes. But I don't think anybody should ever feel scared to say no, and nobody should ever feel guilty if somebody has done something that is so egregious that has made you pull out of a situation. You don't have to own that. That's not a shame thing. That is not on anybody but that person who has crossed the line.
Great, that's exactly where I was going to go. It really depends on the topic and the environment and how comfortable you are with your coworkers. Definitely, there's no question. If you feel unsafe, you need to do something about that. If you feel something's inappropriate, I really feel like you need to speak up and say, I don't feel like we should be talking about this. And as Paige said, walk away. I think you owe that to the person talking. They may not even realize that they've offended you. And that's hard for some people to actually tell somebody that it's not a topic you want to talk about, right? But today there are so many topics out there that people are just not agreeing on. And in some workplaces, I know in mine, we've actually encouraged open sharing. And that has been healthy in a lot of aspects, but it's some people can't handle that, right? It's an individual thing. There were things, I'm going to be honest, I'm going to show my age. 30 years ago, you just didn't talk about at work. It was just things you didn't do that. Today, they're commonplace, but you've got to know yourself well enough to know when you get into a situation that is uncomfortable or you feel is inappropriate. You need to be emotionally mature enough to see where if you bring up a topic, the impact it's having on others. And that's how you gauge in the conversation. So I would caution you to feel your way in these conversations, but at any point, if you feel uncomfortable or you feel threatened, stand up for yourself. So that's, and Paige, I thought you did an excellent job with that.
I don't have much of anything to add to that. I mean, I think you've hit the nail on the head, Raeanne. There's value in the open conversations, and yet there are some things that simply shouldn't be discussed. And standing up for yourself in those situations is valuable because it shows your peers or whoever it is that you're not going to be a part of that in the future, right? And that they usually will not have that conversation around you again. If they want to continue that behavior, it's not going to be with you because they've seen how you reacted to it. Now, other side of that is if the conversation is bad enough that it shouldn't be happening, right? If it's a difference of opinions, it's one thing, but if it's bad enough that it's shouldn't be happening at all and you see it continuing, right? It's even a stickier situation to say, do I go tell HR? Do I go, right? What else should we do about this? And I think that's where the value of a mentor comes in because everything can be so situational and every company can handle those things so differently. There are some that would have literally a zero tolerance policy, right? And could end up in a separation right then and there off of some topics. But there are others that would have more of an inclusive or open-minded policy about it and may just give coaching and have that, make sure that individual understands exactly what Raeanne said. How are their words affecting other people, right? It's a big deal to have that maturity. It's amazing to think back to childhood, right? But it's literally just think before you speak.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those responses. I'm curious, as a follow-up question, and you all just have provided such great insight about the process and how to navigate rocky roads, so to speak, and uncomfortable situations. How does your support structure change? Like how you would provide support for a entry-level engineer in this situation, but also for a student who has gone through a co-op process or is currently an intern at the company and would very much so like to continue on with the company full-time. And if a sticky situation arises, how would you help that student navigate in the lens of still advocating for themselves? I mean, Paige hit the nail on the head is speaking up and saying how it makes you feel. Where does that change, if it does change, for a student that is just started with your company but would like to continue on and needs help navigating that?
So I'll take a swag at that if it's okay. We've actually had instances where we've had interns that have been afraid to speak up because they're interns, right? And it left them at a loss and it left us at a loss. We make a lot of investment in interns and co-ops, and we want to see them successful, whether it's with us or with somebody else. So again, we would expect you to try to speak up to help us as much as help you. Once we have co-ops, we've got a pretty good system set up. We do try to do mentoring. We actually do matchups. We have training that are available. Jaeger mentioned his training. We usually offer crucial conversations, assertiveness training. We've done Brene Brown's courageous leadership. We try to give the tools to our employees to have those conversations. We also have co-op, our intern liaisons in our HR office that are excellent if you're having problems and you're not connecting with the organizational management. So we do have systems in place. Again, if you're offered a mentor, somebody that you can actually talk to, that's a great option. I would also highly encourage trying to develop a good relationship with your manager. I've always found that's one of my frontline advocates. So I would suggest that. But I would really expect, unless you need help developing the tools, that you would have the same opportunities to speak up as a full-time employee.
And I think
does anyone else want to take a swag at that one?
You did a pretty good job answering again. I would say, for my view of this, and I'm trying to put myself back in the shoes of being a student or an intern again, you know, if you're scared to speak up because you're afraid, oh, well, it might cost me a full-time job, or if you're a full-time employee at that point, like, well, I might get fired, or I might, you know, if people disagree with me, I might not have as much of a career potential, things along those lines, you know, that is not healthy, right? And some of that is you're not bringing your full self into the office, or you're avoiding something because you're afraid of what might happen. And the reality in my eyes is, if something is that bad and you address it and the outcome isn't what you expect, right? If the outcome is repercussion, especially during an internship, well, then that's shame on the company. first off, but I also think that might be your sign that that's not a great place to be in the long term. Not to say that you won't see companies change or adapt with time, because I know I've seen that just in my 10 years at ExxonMobil around a lot of things. We've had a lot of change, but the reality is if they're not willing to, or if they've tried to have repercussions against you, if they're not willing to have that conversation and understand why something affected you the way it did, then might not be a great match to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that hits right on the nail right on the head. If you are in a situation and, somebody's like, why would you speak up about that? It's would you really want to work there on a long-term basis? I will say, I think that it's important that you have a coachable feeling. So as much as you're saying or you're absorbing information, you're also putting out information. The value for a company with an intern, there's value for the company, right? We're learning from you. We're learning different processes. We're getting new ideas, and new information is coming from you. So it really is supposed to be kind of this, I don't know, my science teacher is going to be upset, symbiotic, where it like flows back and forth, right? So there's a give and take in any position, internship, full-time, whatever, where you're giving to the company and the company's giving to you. So I think that you would expect that and want that and look for that. It may be hard. This is obviously a kind of an unprecedented time to be looking for an opportunity. I know when Jaeger as well came out of school in the recession, it wasn't a great, place to be looking for opportunities. But I will say, I think that's the most important thing. Anytime you're interviewing, anytime you're having a conversation, it is a conversation, right? Like it is back and forth and give and take. And if one person's just talking at you, that may not be where you want to be.
Absolutely. And you alluded to this, Paige. I'm curious how each of you would give advice to students. Again, we're talking about during the situation. So as an intern, as a co-op, as a full-time engineer, how about effective ways to advocate for yourself, even in the interview process? So in researching for opportunities and then having that initial conversation within an interview, what are types of questions that each of you might suggest to students in order to get more of a feel about the work environment and the support structure in place? I know, Raeanne, you talked about that as a supervisor, that can be one of your biggest advocates, but are there intentional ways that students can prepare for these situations, even at the interview process, and how to advocate for themselves during that time as well?
Yeah, I think if you are in an interview and it's just one-on-one with the hiring manager, right? Then I think the first question you're going to ask is, what does your team look like? Tell me more about your team. Tell me, what type of leader would you say? There are questions that you may think, oh, I shouldn't ask that. I think the more engaging the question and the more kind of, it's like a little spicy. Those are the things that the manager is going to be like, wow, like, okay, this person's serious. This person is, ready to take the next step into their career, because they're already thinking ahead. They're already thinking about the next step. So I think that's a good one. What does your team look like? What type of leader do you think you are? How do you teach? What type of learners work best on your team? Even if they're just like, I don't know, these are the types of people that I have here, and this is why, I think my team is successful. But at least you're having a conversation, you're getting to see more. So the more you talk to someone, like any walk of life, the more you learn about them. So I think you just want to keep a manager, keep an internship. You want to keep them engaged and keep them talking. I think Yeah, I think you keep asking questions, and you can always go into an interview and have kind of a couple of thoughts in your head. But I would definitely recommend when at the very end they say, do you have any questions for me? Have something prepared, even if you already know the answer to. Just have something so that you it makes the connection to them that you are engaged, that you are prepared, and that you've taken some time ready for this situation. That's, I guess, my biggest takeaway or biggest advice.
Yeah, I think it is big. I've been doing interviews for ExxonMobil at Auburn for 5 or 6 years now, and my biggest piece of feedback that I think I really, from my own regrets, was not treating the interview as a two-way conversation, right? So the interview, usually you sit down and the company is going to sit down and ask a bunch of questions for you to answer as a student. And the idea is we're learning what kind of person you are, and we're learning what skills you have, what you're capable of. And in the same way, the students need to have those questions that are valid to them poised back at the companies, right? Regardless of what the company is. So what's the company's view on leadership style? What's the company's view on, work flex policy? Like I've actually had a student ask me in an interview one time if they could work from home for the first year that they were employed. And it was like, this is pre-COVID. Now, maybe that would be legit now, but a couple of years ago, that was not even a thought, especially not in more of an old school company like ExxonMobil. It was, no, that's not going to work. So feel free to ask those questions as an interview candidate, right? I mean, you're also considering spending the next 25, 30, 40 years of your career possibly with these companies. You should get to know them, right?
I think all of those are good. I've had questions about asking me what the culture is within the organization and the larger organization and how we fit in. I've really had some really good questions about how we would allow them to continue learning and what mechanisms we have. And that's always nice to see that somebody wants to continue to learn. And then I agree with Jaeger. You need to know what's important to you, and don't be afraid to ask. If it is you want to seek a master's degree after you go to work, you can ask about it. If it is flexibility, I'd ask about that. So it is your opportunity. You should have done your homework before the interview on the basics, right? But it's an opportunity to get to know who's interviewing and what they think of the organization. And you can even ask about ways that you could fit in, right? So definitely a two-way, especially that last question they ask you, is there anything you want to know? Have something prepared if you're interested.
Absolutely. Thank you all for that. I want to circle back around a little bit. Early on, each of you mentioned already some of the ways your companies are encouraging open dialogue, I think, Raeanne, you mentioned crucial conversations and open dialogue. Jaeger, you mentioned a training class as well. And Paige, I bet you could definitely talk about this with your role, even with the 2 years at Southwire. Has there been progression that each of you have seen in relation to ways in which your employer has supported you in the beginning of your time with your company, and then kind of how things are progressing to today? So in 2020, what are support structures in place, not only in being able to have open dialogue and critical conversation, but continued ways to engage in collaboration, and if a differing of opinion or of a conflict comes into fruition, how does that process look to each of you in your affiliations?
So I guess I can start with this. Similar to my first answer, I don't have a great answer for this. One thing that I will say is every company is going to be a little different, right? And my my experience with ExxonMobil is going to be based on a large, often slow to change or slow to move company, like the Titanic, unfortunately, sometimes big ship, little rudder. So we have actually made a very distinct effort in the last 5 years about changing the company culture to get away from what was viewed as this dinosaur or this large ship, small rudder. And what came with that was opening up a lot of paths to dialogue, whether that was with your direct supervisor that maybe wasn't encouraged in the past, or whether that was more conversations with HR, more conversations through training, open dialogue training. The other one was that the company implemented a new role here in the Baytown area that was intentionally focused on young engineers. So it was somebody who was essentially an extra manager who oversaw the 100 and some odd 1 to 3 year or less engineers in the area, but they weren't managing their workload. They were managing their whole self, if that makes sense. And so this individual was trying to help develop them into future leaders or develop them into future technical experts, whatever they wanted. And this person was specifically focused on minority candidates because they recognized that that was the group that was being left out, right? If you look at corporate ExxonMobil, you look at corporate America across the board, minority candidates are the ones that we are missing out on in upper leadership levels. And the only way you're going to get there is to start by training people or helping people from the beginning. And so we had this position created. It was intentionally trying to fill gaps that some of these individuals maybe didn't have because they grew up in the Philippines, or they grew up in Mexico, or they grew up in Africa. And so I thought that was a really good change, and that was implemented about 2.5 years ago. And I happen to know the manager who's been here doing that role, and I've been able to ask her how much of a difference she's been able to see. And she said that we have people that in her mind would likely have left the company over the last 10 years because they don't feel like they're getting the support that they needed. And because of this role and some of the mentoring that she's been able to roll out with that role, they've now started to really excel. And some of their individual strengths that maybe don't align with what we're used to seeing as a strength has really started to flourish, right? Somebody who's able to think outside the box wasn't always a shining star at ExxonMobil because we were really being trained to think inside the box. And now we're really flipping that one over. So.
Yeah, so I think for Southwire, for just some of the things that I've noticed, even just being there for 2 years, the town that Southwire is in is a small town, Carrollton, Georgia. Probably nobody else on the call knows what I'm talking about, but I grew up there. So I've known Southwire for a very long time. So kind of coming back into the position and coming back into the company, it was a different Southwire than the one I knew when I left and went to school at Auburn. It is family owned. So there is a family that sits on the board, but instead of being the founder, it's now the third generation. So I think that's really helped kind of, pull us a little bit, kind of the Titanic, we've pulled a little bit away from that. And now we have a little bit more of a just overall bring your whole self to work environment. When people say, oh, it's a family type of company, no, it is. And, families don't always get along. There's not always this sit around the fire, sing kumbaya moments. There's some, kind of grit, and there's some friction that happens with that. I'm so excited about kind of where our path has started and where it's going with the third generation kind of being at the helm. We've taken a lot of our initiatives, like we have a voter initiative right now, obviously the current election being the biggest focus, but just some of the things around how you think and why you do the things that you do. We've taken a couple of assessments that are now company-wide, so everybody gets a chance to understand how they think, and then they get to see how they fit in their team. And so there's different quadrants of somebody in a certain quadrant first thinks about who and somebody else thinks about why. So it's kind of how you relate there. So I think that's a really interesting way that we've opened up conversation and dialogue. I also have seen an increase, and we're continuing to increase the goals for where we want to be, our diversity initiatives, but also just from our business initiatives. They're all tied to how we can have more people from different places. That's really been the best part of the last, since 2016 with our new CEO, is just having new people bring new ideas. In the last, 4 years, we've doubled profits twice. So I don't think that there's any doubt that the more diversity we have, the better company we are. And I'm really excited to continue in down that path. And, who knows what next year's initiative might be, but I'm excited that we're steering away from what we knew into some of the unknown.
Okay. And I'd also have to say there's been a lot of change since I came to work. I'm not even sure that I could have envisioned being in the position that I am when I first started 30 years ago, not because I'm a woman, actually more because of my personality. NASA was a very hard driving, very assertive, strong organization when I came, and I did fine in it. But today I see a lot of embracing differences in race, culture, personality, and there's a lot of emphasis on inclusion. It's great to have differences in your workforce, but inviting them to the table so they can be heard, that's when you get the real magic. So lots of changes there. Other things that I have seen, especially interested to you that are starting careers, is when I first came on, it was head down and color. And the way you got noticed was through the hard work and more hard work and more hard work. And if you did, you might get an opportunity. Today, we actually have programs that encourage early career people to be leaders. They get their own projects, programs, so you start very early getting opportunities. And I think that's wonderful. I'm excited by it because people can lead at any age. You don't have to be 45 before you're your first project manager. We have also fully embraced mentoring. Not only do we encourage people to have their individual mentors, we have, they seem quarterly mentoring events where we bring all of our executive leaders and offer speed mentoring to not only early career, but mid-career and late, because you want to improve at any age. So that's exciting to me. Training is much more abundant. And training around the topics we're talking about today, because we realize for people to be successful, they can't ignore problems. They've got to be able to meet them head on. So I'd already mentioned we do the crucial conversations, assertiveness training, which I took, I'm not going to tell you how old I was, but I took it later than most. And I was really happy to find out I was assertive. I just wasn't aggressive, was the diagnosis. But we actually encouraged the learning. And so we've also, if you do have issues, we've got so many ways to have those resolved. We have a technical authority path that's totally independent. And I've actually had people take technical issues all the way up to the administrator level. People care and want to hear. So lots of changes. I'm very pleased with where we're going. And I really think it's a reflection of the country and the changes that we're all seeing. So very pleased.
Absolutely. Well, I hope the students on the call recognize the multiple companies represented and reasons why they should really much inquire about your workplaces. As it's so incredible to hear the progression from each of you and the changes that have been implemented. And I think a root of that is because of the employees that each of you, who you are, but also who you work with. And so finding effective ways, Jaeger mentioned, to intentional programming and training specifically to create more inclusive environments and recognize that everybody is on their individualized path. And so let's figure out how to provide and promote growth. Is what each of you kind of alluded to. And I also really like, Raeanne, when you talked about that leadership development piece. And so I hope that our students recognize that they will not be entry-level engineers forever. They will have opportunity to be able to build and develop as leaders and effective managers. And with that, even from an intern into an entry-level position into a manager role, each of those roles are essential, and each of those have the ability to contribute to the larger opportunity that's provided. So I think that that is super neat to hear from each of you. A question was submitted while each of you were talking, and it's so funny, Raeanne, you brought it up without even knowing that, but I'm curious to hear with more of the open dialogue and some of the training courses and intentional conversations, are there training opportunities at each of your companies for leadership, for management, particularly in relation to conflict resolution and critical conversation? Or does that expectation change a little bit of, oh, well, you've been in management for 15 years, so you should help diffuse organically, so to speak?
I can start with that. Okay, no, go ahead, Paige.
Sorry. No, I think it's interesting that you say that. You know, you've been in it for so long, so you know, of course, you know it. I think there is always something to learn, especially when it comes to people. So yeah, we do have some kind of siloed management opportunities. So they're built instead of by kind of like by business unit. So they have their specific projects that they work with within a business unit. I'm most familiar with the HR group because that's where I sit. So Manager Ready HR program, where they are getting some additional education, they get specific certifications, and then you also are walking through a lot of training, not just about the company, but the managerial piece of how to do conflict resolution, how to provide mentorship, how to have these sticky, difficult conversations. And on the engineering side, there's the same program, but it sits in our operations group.
Okay, at NASA, there are several avenues for that. I was lucky enough at the senior level to do a course that they offer once every few years, and it was for executive training. And of course, the conflict resolution was part of that. And as Paige was saying about the silos, they actually make you during this training go work in another silo, to say that, just so that you are flexible and you not only see from another vantage point, they know that at any time that they can pick you up and put you there, right? They see you as very mobile. But our training starts pretty early. We did have, it's being revamped, something called NASA First. It's Foundations and Influence. I can't remember what it is, but it's an entry career level management and leadership training. And then we have a mid-level training course, and we've got tons of, put your own course selections together. But I really liked what Paige said about learning. I've been through the executive level, and believe it or not, they found something else for me. I'm currently doing alternative dispute resolution, and it's all around conflict management. It's I'm going to be trained to try to mediate between two parties that are in conflict and can't come to a resolution. So that kind of training goes on throughout your career, and they do it that way because it's hard, and it's important.
Raeanne, do you think we could send you to Washington when you finish that training?
I've been there, and I like it in Huntsville, Alabama.
No, and I won't add a lot. So the training classes for ExxonMobil are very similar to what you described for NASA. So we essentially ramp up for trainings as you go through your career. They continue to have more and more available, I guess. And so often we'll start out with about your first 2 to 3 years of trying to get us into at least two or three training classes per year. And some are broad. Maybe it's like an ExxonMobil overview. What does the corporation do? And then some are going to be more specific, like conflict management or leadership trainings. And then once you actually get into a supervisory or management role, the leadership trainings feel like they never end, to be honest. There's kind of a plethora of different things that you can dive into, whether it's the conflict resolution, or we have, for my employees, so I manage a group of what we call frontline supervisors, who each manage a group of about 5 to 8 technicians who run our plant for us. And so those frontline supervisors are I think we've gotten up to where they are expected to go through about a training a year on leadership. And they've gone into role playing now, which is really interesting for this group of individuals, very, very much blue collar workers who have come up in the oil fields. And so, you probably can image mostly rough, tough, gruff individuals, and that's what they are. And if you've ever watched them do role playing for conflict resolution, it's pretty funny. But what's not funny is that coming out the backside of it, they all walked away and kind of said, oh, I understand now, right? Like, I get it. Because when they hired in 20 or 30 years ago, conflict resolution was who can hit the hardest, right? And in that line in the field, that's all they knew, was who could yell the loudest or who could hit the hardest. And now having to actually work through their problems over the last, I'd say that probably 10 to 15 years ago, that changed. It's very interesting to see that click in their heads as they go through some of the trainings that are offered now. And we see the same thing going up through the management to the executive ranks. So we offer leadership, essentially leadership 101, 201, 301. And I had the privilege of taking the 301 course about a year and a half ago, and that was offered. We actually went out to Arizona, to Phoenix, and took it through the Thunderbird School of Executive Leadership. And so that was a really eye-opening experience, because we're getting training from people who are executive coaches with the CEOs of ExxonMobil, CEO of ExxonMobil, the CEO of Chevron, of GE, you name it. They do coaching with those individuals, and yet we're sitting in a classroom learning from them. So really shows you that it doesn't ever stop, right?
Absolutely. Jaeger, I'm hearing you maybe agree to some role playing for an additional program. Maybe that's something we can navigate, because it comes with practice and it comes with exposure. But that's such a neat experience that you shared about the changes that have happened. But it's also really nice to hear, not only from you, but from each of you, is to reiterate that learning does not stop. And so our students have the exciting opportunity in the classroom here at Auburn to learn and to become knowledgeable in their subject areas and their disciplines. And then being able to translate that into the workplace is really learn by doing and learning by understanding the bigger picture. But from a leadership development perspective, and managerial development is essential for all, at all levels and in all different roles, and it doesn't stop. And so that's something that's exciting, and I hope is exciting for students to recognize as well. So thank you all. So I have 2 questions left. We've had 2 questions submitted, and then we'll wrap us up for this evening. So for the next 2, I would love to hear from all of you, but if you'd like to share, please do. And if not, that is totally okay as we wrap up today. The question is around what we mentioned a little bit earlier today is let's keep it from the lens of a brand new professional. How early is too early for a new professional to start to ask for projects or additional roles and responsibility that may be outside of the specific set of responsibilities they were hired for?
So I think if you're sitting in a brand new seat and you have gotten your feet on the ground, and for some people or some positions that may take a month, that may take 2 months, that may take, 6 months, a year, as long as you feel like you have a full grasp of what your kind of your day-to-day is, right? That daily whirlwind of what you do, as long as you have a firm grasp there and you know that you can get those things done, I don't think there's any problem with raising your hand and saying, hey, I noticed this project was being done. I'm interested because of A, B, and C. I'd love to if I can, or I'd love to get more information. I think what you don't want to do is go to your supervisor or your boss and say, I got a lot of time. Like, what else can I do? What more can I do? When you go to your manager, you definitely want to have, here's project A I'd like to be involved in, or project B. You want to have that specific project kind of already in mind. So you're not going just saying, hey, I need more work.
Yeah, Marissa, I may or may not have understood the question correctly. So you can alter my path if I go down the wrong one. But when you're hired to do a job, right? And I agree with Paige that you need to do that job until you feel that you can do it. But at NASA, we actually hire people in to do a job. They receive the training and the mentoring they need. And quite often, what's important is that they know how to interact with others that help them do their job. So we actually send them away for 6 months to go try something different. And it's really appropriate if that's the kind of it's not an internship, but an entry program you have, to be vocal about what you'd like to learn, as well as what your supervisor might feel is beneficial to doing your job. There are some people that come out of college and they know exactly what they want to do, and they get that first job and they stay in it for 30 years. But that's probably not the majority. And I would encourage you, I don't encourage anybody that takes a job to jump to a new job in a year or two. You kind of, at least my philosophy, not everybody agrees, is that you need to, if somebody's hired you, given you a promotion, you need to try to stick that out and give back to the company in that way. But you need to be talking to your supervisor from the first time you talk about what you think your goals are, where you want to go, because that person has the most influence on helping you get there. So that's not a straightforward answer. It depends on how you do an entry program. But I would at least dedicate enough time to a position that you actually are producing before you start looking somewhere else, if you're actually talking about a change. I hope I answered that correctly, Marissa.
Absolutely. Yes, you did.
The only thing I would say is I don't think the only time it's too early to talk about taking on additional responsibilities is before you're competent in the job that you've been assigned. Mm-hmm. And we do a lot of job movement at Exxon, and I would tell you that in the first 3 months of a new job, you're incompetent. The next 3 months, you've gained competency over about half of what you're trying to do. And so somewhere around the 6-month mark in a new job is when I personally feel like, okay, I'm starting to get my feet on the ground and I'm seeing what I have in front of me. And at that point have a reasonable view as to whether I would have time to take on something else or not. The reality is it takes years to really become fully competent in some of these jobs, but that's not always granted. So.
Sure. And I think part of that too is that layer, as we talked about this evening, is not only focusing in on your roles and responsibilities, but really also intentionally building those collaborations with the teammates around you and understanding how to navigate the workplace overall. What are some of the company culture norms in relation to showing up early and staying late? And how can you recognize from a self-care perspective, taking a lunch break and being able to have breaks in those conversations on the side, because that equally will add to that longevity, as Raeanne alluded to, is don't just think about this next role as a 1 to 2 year commitment, but how this can really play an integral part in your career path long-term. So thank you all. The last question for the Q&A portion is in relation to today. So 2020 and the all the changes that have come specifically with the pandemic and potentially, well, obviously social distancing, potentially remote work. How have some of the training courses or just the critical conversations overall changed at all in relation to virtual, remote, or have you seen it been impacted specifically in relation to the workplace currently with the pandemic?
I mean, speaking for us, I haven't really seen firsthand a lot of change there. I think that everyone's emotions are a little more on edge because of everything that's going on. And because of that, maybe we're more sensitive to the topics that are being discussed or things along those lines. From a training perspective, we have not necessarily changed anything yet. A fair bit of our training has gone online instead of being in person, but not all of it by any means. The things where we have to do role playing for leadership, things like that. I actually have an employee that's in one right now. And so I would say it's the content may be slightly different, but the fundamentals should be the same.
Yes, so ours, I would say most of our training has gone online. Even things that we normally would do in person, we've pushed those to be online. From a communication standpoint, I think we've really just been more intentional about, setting up time. It's like, it's like, okay, here's 30 minutes for fun, here's 30 minutes for this. Just because if you don't schedule it out, people will work. We've seen a lot of people that will work forever, right? So it's like you have to say, all right, enough is enough. It's going to be here tomorrow, walk away. So I think that's really, we've just been more intentional about communication and more intentional about scheduling. But yeah, everything that we've done has been online. We do still have facilities that are running, but all of our functional and corporate areas have gone online.
Yeah, we're online for the most part. We've just gone to a stage where if you have to be on site to do your work, you work in a lab, you can create a huge package showing how you're going to be safe and things like that, and you can get back. But as far as having the critical and the important conversations, I'm going to be honest with you, at first it was difficult. There are some things that being in the room with somebody, and when I talked earlier about being able to see how your words impact others, you can have meetings where people don't turn on the camera, and you lose that visual aspect. People are having, at least it's been my experience, that more of my employees are having personal issues that they're having to balance during this time with children at home, extra stresses. And Paige was just right. You have to be intentional. You have to have somebody turn on their camera when you want to have a conversation that is important. And I've had, it seems to me actually that this 6 months, I've had more of these strongly emotional, crucial conversations than I would have anticipated. And just thank goodness for the technology that we have, that it allows us to do that. The upside of that is I'm seeing people that I thought were inflexible, we're flexible and we can adjust. And that in itself is some of the positives coming out of this, is you're actually seeing people make accommodations for others in this time. So I found it to be at first very hard and something I had to work at, but it's improving.
Wonderful. Well, we are about to time, but first and foremost, just as we wrap up this evening, I cannot thank you all enough for being a part of our panel tonight. So thank you so much to Jaeger, Paige, and Raeanne. Your insight and your examples are just extremely helpful. I have learned so much from each of you, and I can only imagine what the students have gained from this experience. So thank you all so incredibly much for your time this evening, and also for just sharing a lot of the example and intentional ways that our students can continue to develop professionally and as future engineers in a variety of industries. So as we wrap up today, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, we are also wrapping up our entire first series within the college for inclusion and diversity, our panel series. So just a big thank you to not only the three of you this evening, and also the other employers and companies that represented our last two panels as well. I'd also like to give a big thank you to several of the offices and campus partners that helped to make this series come to fruition. And so members with the Engineering Academic Excellence Program, so Dr. Brown and Eric Hall, thank you so much. 100 Women Strong with Diane, thank you. Big shout out to my office for supporting me with this panel, but also overall with the content. And so the Office of Career Development and Corporate Relations, and then all the really phenomenal marketing that went into place to help really encourage these conversations to happen. And so our communications and marketing team. And so I've got 2 minutes left before my voice goes completely, but I also just overall am just really excited that as a college, as the Samuel Ginn College of Engineering, is that we're having these conversations and we are prompting and figuring out ways to continue to have these conversations. And so for students on this call, I hope that you know that we are doing our very best to continue to advocate, to provide opportunity and provide intentional ways to support you, not only as students, but also as future professionals. And so we will continue this. But something I want to leave you all with is the idea, and I challenge you to think about within your job searches, within your long-term plans and careers, is I don't want you to strive for fit. I don't want you to strive for the mold that may take place at a certain company. I really want to encourage you to think about growth. As our panelists talked about tonight, the ability to continue to learn, to continue to grow, and to ask the questions. I think sometimes we fear that we don't know something, and so we just shouldn't ask and draw attention to it. But that is a level of vulnerability that I encourage you to find and to experience, so that that will go back into the workplace and that will go back into your futures as career. And so fit is a term used a lot in the hiring process, and we touched on that in the previous two panels about creating inclusive environments in the workplace, and also decoding the hiring process and implicit bias that goes into play. And that my goal and my hope for you is to find ways to, again, be a member at that table. Raeanne talked about that, finding ways to the decision table, finding ways, mentorship, and being able to just know what questions to ask, but most importantly, know yourself best. And so that is what I have for this evening. And so I thank you all again for being a part of tonight's panel, and participants and students, thank you for hanging on with us this evening and the previous two panels. And I hope that we can just continue to find effective ways to support our students. So thank you all so much, and War Eagle.
Thank you. War Eagle, y'all.